Support for the statewide broadcast of the State of Ohio comes from the law firm of Porter Wright Morris and Arthur LLP, helping businesses and individuals solve complex legal problems throughout Ohio, across the country, and around the world. On the web at porterwright.com. And from the Ohio Education Association, representing 120,000 members who work to inspire their students to think creatively and experience the joy of learning. Online at ohea.org.
A controversial proposal to cap drug prices paid by the state gets the go-ahead. And an amendment to overturn a law that overturned all local gun bans has the backing of gun control advocates, but it's been blasted by pro-gun groups. We'll hear from both sides on that plan and more, all this week in the state of Ohio. Lawmakers now have the opportunity to decide on a proposal to cap the price Ohio pays for drugs it buys from Medicaid, prisons, and other state-run programs. A California-based foundation formed a group called Ohioans for Fair Drug Prices, which has proposed a law that would demand that Ohio pay no more for drugs than the Federal Department of Veterans Affairs, which it says pays at least 20% less than the state does. The group filed petitions for the Ohio Drug Price Relief Act in December, but they were met with complaints from the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, the drug makers' chief lobbying group. The petition's signatures went through 2 reviews because of those complaints, and Secretary of State John Husted threw out tens of thousands of signatures, but enough remained for the Drug Price Relief Act to be sent on to lawmakers this week. If they don't act on it in 4 months, the group can gather more signatures to put it before voters this fall. The drug makers, which say the measure threatens consumer access to drugs, has spent $38 million fighting a similar measure in California. State officials are looking into what appeared to be a developing water crisis in the northeast Ohio village of Sebring in Mahoning County. The water there has now tested below the federally allowable level for lead, but the operators of the water system did not notify the public for months that unsafe levels of lead had been found in some homes last summer. Democratic Representative John Bocheri of nearby Poland has now proposed a bill requiring officials to notify people within 30 days. It is the final weekend of campaigning in New Hampshire for the candidates for president, including Governor John Kasich. He's hoping his Granite State-based strategy will pay off and give him at least a top 3 finish after coming in 8th in the Iowa caucuses, which he all but skipped to stay in the Northeast. The underdog candidate for the Democratic nomination for U.S. Senate has been trying to spark media coverage of his campaign and to get the endorsed candidate in the race, former Governor Ted Strickland, to debate him. Calls for debates in that race made by several pundits have gone unanswered. Cincinnati City Councilman P.G. Sittenfeld has made gun regulations the center of his campaign, and he's put forward a unique idea, a constitutional amendment that would override a state law from 2006 banning local gun bans. The Ohio Supreme Court upheld the so-called preemption law that overturned all local gun bans in Ohio. But Sittenfeld says this amendment will restore the constitutional provision of home rule and allow local communities to decide for themselves instead of state lawmakers deciding for them. The proposal has been embraced by gun control activists who flanked Sittenfeld at his press conference introducing it. But gun rights groups blasted it as unconstitutional because they say it would prevent the exercise of a constitutional right. And they say the issue of preemption is settled law. But Sittenfeld says he plans to push this amendment forward regardless of the outcome of the March 15th primary. Here to talk about this amendment and other issues related to gun control and gun rights at the State House are 2 experts on the front lines with this issue. Gerard Valentino is a co-founder of the Buckeye Firearms Association. Jennifer Thorne is the executive director of the Ohio Coalition Against Gun Violence, which supports Sittenfeld's amendment. Thank you both for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
So I'm going to start with you, Jennifer, here. This constitutional amendment, there are those who would say that it's a campaign stunt by Sittenfeld, and we're not here to talk about him. We're here to talk about the amendment. It's clearly an important amendment for you, but it's a huge job to get this amendment before voters. If it actually gets to the point where it's before voters, you're going to face a lot of opposition to getting it passed. And then if it does pass, you're going to face a lot of opposition from the National Rifle Association and other groups who want to litigate it. So why do you feel that this is something that, after a Supreme Court decision saying it's settled law, why do you feel this can go forward and will be upheld?
So I think one of the most interesting thing
about the group of individuals that are coming together to support this proposed amendment is that they are really being realistic about how much hard work it's going to take. And, in all of the statements, they seem to recognize that we're going to need a lot of support and a lot of funding to get this done. And it's not something that, once we've moved past the initial 1,000 signatures, that Ohio Coalition Against Gun Violence or any of the other gun violence prevention groups will be able to do alone. So it's really going to take a broader coalition of individuals and groups working on it. I think that when we're looking at things like 30,000 Americans dying every year from guns and 11,000 of those being homicides, and then more people dying in Ohio from guns than from motor vehicles. This is a real problem that we need to address. And there are common sense legislative solutions that can work. But because of the gun lobby's influence in Washington and here in the State House, we're not able to get any progress made on overwhelmingly popular things like background checks, for example. So when we look to restoring something that has been in place in Ohio before, and it was very popular, there were over 20 cities and municipalities that had gun safety rules in place that were overturned by a gun lobby supported preemption law. So we're really looking to return back to what once existed in Ohio. This is not really a new idea. This is returning back to what we know worked when we allowed our local communities to make their own decisions about how guns are regulated in their communities.
So Gerard, let me ask you, you say this proposal is unconstitutional, but there is clear support for it, at least if you go back to when this law was litigated. Over 20 cities, like Jennifer just said, Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Toledo, had passed regulations on guns, and then this law overturned those. So shouldn't local officials have the right to decide what they feel should go on in their communities? I mean, that's what we ask of school boards and township trustees. Why should state lawmakers get to decide?
It's not so much even to say state lawmakers get to decide. This is not only an issue when we're talking about the Ohio Constitution. This is also a bigger United States constitutional issue. We wouldn't allow a local authority or a local municipality to say, you have no freedom of speech rights in our city. We wouldn't allow them to say, we're going to suspend the Fourth Amendment protection against unlawful search and seizures, or say we can't allow someone to use their Fifth Amendment rights in our little city here. So for the same reason, we can't let them try to litigate the Second Amendment rights, which are a protected individual right. The Heller case that went to the U.S. Supreme Court decided that. The other thing about this that I think a lot of people forget is the assault weapons bans and all those other local gun laws didn't work. In the years after preemption passed in the state of Ohio, gun crime, gun violence, even in the cities that had those bans in place, went down. So you have to ask yourself, the right to keep and bear arms is accepted as an individual right. There's no debate on that. The Supreme Court has ruled that. You have to have a tangible, identifiable public good to infringe on that right. And if when those laws were overturned, gun crime and gun violence went down, what possible reason or tangible benefit is there to bring them all back? There isn't. And that's part of the problem, is we're going back to situations in the state that didn't work then. They're not going to work now. And the thought of banning a certain type of gun because the way it looks, or giving a particular municipality the ability to ban guns in their own little way, it failed then, it'll fail now, it'll fail in the future. Gun control is a failed social experiment. Anybody that looks at the issue objectively can very clearly see that. Right now in America, we have more guns on the street than ever before in history, because all 50 states have legal concealed carry. Yet during that time, gun crime, gun violence has plummeted. We have less murders today than we did in 1987 when Florida passed their concealed carry law, which kind of was when it all started. So then what benefit is there to ban guns?
Let me ask you to weigh in on that, Jennifer, and also the whole idea of preemption was supposed to get rid of this patchwork of legislation where you could carry a concealed weapon in one city but not in another, and so somebody who wanted to abide by the law was kind of caught with, you had to bone up on the laws just to travel the state of Ohio. So let me ask you to weigh in on what Gerard just said here about crime going down at the same time, and also on this patchwork effect. How do we keep gun owners who want to be lawful to stay lawful if we bring back these local local gun bans?
So first of all, I wanted to address the issue of compatibility with the Second Amendment, and the language for this, which would be an amendment to the Constitution of the state of Ohio, would state, as I understand it, that the local gun safety laws would have to be compatible with the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution. Now, in the 2008 Heller decision, the court did hold for the first time that an individual did have the right to have a gun, but they didn't extend that right to having it for, potential self-defense, which we can talk about the data surrounding that we know that a gun in your home is actually 22 times more likely to be used in a suicide, homicide, or an unintentional shooting than to be ever used for self-defense. But back to the court decision, their decision did not extend past one's doorstep. And they also said that there are lots of different common sense gun regulations that can be upheld. So let's get that part straight first. Secondly, the idea that gun crime and violence has gone down simply because there's more guns on the street is a fallacy. We're not seeing people with concealed carry licenses saving the day in these mass shootings. A lot of times they're actually not intervening because they recognize that their presence with the gun is going to make the job of law enforcement that much harder to tell who is the good guy and who is the bad guy in this situation. All I see are guns. Now, back to the question of this patchwork. That is sort of the oldest argument in the book, and I frankly reject it because it actually would impact a very small percentage of Ohioans. Most of us don't feel like it's a good idea to strap on a gun and walk out the door every day, and I think that it is incumbent upon those individuals to know if they are in a locality that regulates where they can and can't have a concealed carry. So, and I think what we're looking at is just a potential modification of the places that a hidden loaded gun can be carried. So maybe a city would say, not in our parks, not in our daycare centers, et cetera.
And I want to kind of piggyback on that and ask you, Gerard, the whole idea of people who want to be able to go to the park and not have people with concealed weapons around them. I mean, I know that certainly there might be people who are not following the law, which has been the concealed carry argument for all along, that outlaws will have guns. Why can't law-abiding citizens have guns as well? But what do you say to people who say that, hey, you're taking your right to self-defense and your right to feel safe and putting it over my right to be in a park where guns are not allowed?
Well, there's really not much to say in a situation like that because it's not a consistent argument. The gun only becomes an issue of safety when it's used in a crime or it's used in some way illegally. Like you pointed out, every day you walk past, you get in line with at the local store, hundreds of people that are carrying guns. And there's no public safety threat. We know that because when Ohio passed concealed carry back in 2004, despite what the anti-gun side claimed, blood would run into streets. You were involved in it. I remember discussing that issue with you. None of that happened. We saw gun crime and gun violence go down. So regardless of whether or not someone wants to claim they have a right to be in a park without someone with a gun, A, they don't have that right. That's first and foremost. But B, it's not a public safety issue. Today, tomorrow, the next day, you're going to be in a park with someone with a gun, a licensed concealed carry holder, and it's not going to be an issue. And as for the spree killings that have taken place, in the instances where there have been a armed victim who fought back in the spree killings, the Ogden, Utah Mall, the Pearl, Mississippi school shooting, which is the biggest one, the death toll has never been higher than 2. When you compare that to Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook, and all those other places where nobody had the ability to fight back with a gun, you have death tolls, Columbine, 16, 17, 31. So we do know that there are instances where a license holder had a gun and fought back. Jeannie Assam, a lady in Colorado in one of the church shootings, drew her gun and fought back. The death toll was 2. When you compare that to the other church shooting that took place in Colorado just 2 months later, the death toll was 12. So it's not a question of if it can help. The question is it will help. We know that. There's tangible, identifiable proof that it will help. And that's the big difference between the anti-gun side of this issue and the pro-gun side of this issue. The anti-gun side of this issue lives in the world of maybe, possibly, we don't know. The pro-gun side lives in the side of, okay, here are the cases where there's been an armed victim that fought back. Here are the death tolls. And we know this. We know that in 1987, when Florida passed its concealed carry law, which is when the concealed carry train started moving in the nation, there were 20,096 murders and non-negligent manslaughter cases. This is according to the FBI. This is not the Violence Policy Center or some pro-gun think tank putting together the statistics like the anti-gun side likes to use. So there was 20,000, just over 20,000. In 2012, the last year that statistics are available, 14,827. Now, I want to make something clear though. I'm not claiming that more people carrying guns caused the crime to go down. That's really not even an issue. What I'm saying is, if as more and more people are carrying guns, crime goes down, whether it had anything to do with those guns or not, what possible justification is there to infringe on an individual right? There isn't one.
Well, go ahead, Jennifer.
I would say that there's never been any validity put to the statement that there is an individual right to carry a concealed weapon. Now, if we go back to the amendment, what we're looking at are local laws like child access prevention laws that were also struck down, bans on junk guns or Saturday night specials. So there are a whole host of other things that local communities no longer have the ability to decide about, and they're at the whim of a gun lobby controlled state house. So really, it's not just about hidden and loaded weapons. It's about a whole host of things that a community should be able to look at and decide what is best for them. Now, there may be some cities in the state of Ohio that don't want to make additional regulations, but it will be up to them. At this point, there's just no ability for people that do want to follow the popular will to do anything.
I want to ask you on this note, let's talk about a couple other bills that are happening here at the State House, because there are several. Let me ask you, Gerard, there's a bill that gun control advocates have called the Guns Everywhere bill. This is the one that allows guns in daycares and airports, parts of airports, police stations, so-called victim zones. That is what's been turned by your side. The bill's passed the House. It's in the Senate now, hasn't had a hearing yet. The New York Times actually weighed in on it by saying it feeds the fantasies of people who think they have the power to stop criminals, even though in practice concealed carry weapons inflict more harm on gun owners and other innocent victims than on actual criminals. And I think Jennifer kind of hinted at that. Let me ask you about that.
Well, the fallacy is that statement
That's not a true statement?
Oh, not even close. You have to remember that the statistics that are thrown out there, 22% of people are gun in a home are more likely to kill a friend or family member. Well, when they put that statistic together, one of the things they did is, I'm a drug dealer, you're a drug dealer. We knew each other. I shot you. You're a family member, friend, or acquaintance. They used every possible ridiculous connection to tie those issues to the gun. But more importantly than that, these issues that we're trying to get, the bill we're trying to get passed now, 25 or 26 other states currently allow carry in those places. None of those states are looking to repeal that because license holders went in there and shot the places up. If there was a problem with those laws and letting people carry in those places, you better believe the other states that allow it would have repealed it immediately. And so to believe that that law would work in, let's say, Texas or Indiana or Pennsylvania, and not believe it would work here in Ohio, you have to make a leap that Ohioans are less trustworthy, more bloodthirsty, and more likely to commit a crime than people in those other states. And that's an absurd notion.
Let me ask Jennifer to weigh in on that whole idea of that concealed carry weapon holders, these are people who went through the process, got the permits, they're trying to follow the law. And if Gerard's stats are correct, they are following the law. Why not allow them to carry these weapons into places where we're already allowing them to carry concealed weapons into bars if they're not drinking, this sort of thing?
So I think the issue with this Guns Everywhere bill, which is House Bill 48, and it's moving its way through the Ohio Senate currently, is that it would further normalize the presence of deadly weapons in our public spaces in places like daycare centers, where it should never be a question as to whether or not there are guns allowed there. It's ridiculous. And, you know, I think the other part about all of this is that it's certainly, you know, the folks that do often, you know, apply to have a license that says that they can carry a hidden and loaded weapon in public spaces, you know, they are people that are concerned about their safety. But everyone is a good guy until they're not a good guy, right? I mean, I don't believe that people's morality is in black and white. I think that we all can go through different situations. We might lose our temper. We might, you know, have a little bit too much drink, or, you know, there are a lot of folks that struggle with addiction issues. And when we look at all of those things, particularly just losing one's temper, those are the times when we become violent. So if there is a gun at the ready, that's really the issue. And secondly, you know, just normalizing the idea that, you know, we're sort of giving up and saying, you know, we're gonna need to face the world armed and ready to kill someone at a moment's notice. That's something that I reject, and it's not something that I think most of Ohioans want for their kids.
And finally, I just want to ask you both about a bill that's just been introduced in the House, but it's an idea that's come back around again. The idea of a concealed carry permit holder not needing to get the permit to carry a concealed weapon. Let me ask you, Gerard, the idea of not doing any training, just getting the concealed weapon?
We go back to the other states that allow it. Alaska allows it, Vermont allows it.
But does that make it a good idea?
Well, yes, it does, and here's why. They don't have a problem with it there. Alaska, Vermont, all these states that allow what we would call constitutional carry, or being able to carry without a license, again, they're not running to repeal those bills. If they were a huge problem in those states, you better believe the legislators would jump on it and enact laws to fix it. The fact of the matter is, those states also allow carry in places like daycare. To me, that's the first place I want to carry. If I'm carrying my concealed handgun, why am I allowed to use it to protect myself and people in a bank, in a Kroger, in a pizza place, but I'm not allowed to protect children with it? I mean, to talk about absurd, that's as absurd as it could be.
And you can't carry a concealed weapon in the State House, where we are right now.
Exactly. It's a whole other issue there as well. And so, again, we don't, when she was talking in her last time through, she said might or maybe 11 times. Might or maybe 11 times. What we can say is these other states have these laws and they're not a problem. They work. Tangible, identifiable evidence to say this is what's going on, this is how effective it is, this is how it works. We don't have to say might, maybe, we think, we know. So again, I go back to what I said earlier. To believe that a constitutional carry bill or a no license carry bill wouldn't work in Ohio, again, you have to believe that we're more bloodthirsty, we're less likely to follow the law, we're less likely to do the right thing than people in those other states. It's not a maybe situation, either or. That's your only choice there.
Jennifer, I'm going to give you the last word on this.
Sure. So we can look at the strength of gun laws across various states, and the fact is that states that have stronger gun laws have lower rates of gun violence. Additionally, in the state of Ohio, we are talking about increased training for our law enforcement, and to propose a bill that would basically give any civilian the ability to pick up and walk out their doors, you know, strapped with a hidden and loaded weapon.
With a background check, though, right?
Well, assuming that they purchase their gun through a method that requires a background check, right? Because we know that there are a lot of guns that are sold without background checks. Now, that's a whole other thing, is that, you know, now we have this executive action, which should, you know, help narrow things like the gun show loophole. But we still need a law, both federally and in the state of Ohio, that talks, you know, that really expands background checks to all gun sales. So, you know, this no permit concealed carry idea is just, it's a horrible idea. And I think that The vast majority of Ohioans just think it's a reckless bill that's being put forth for political purposes to satisfy the gun lobby.
Even though it has, according to Gerard's stats, worked in other states in the sense that it hasn't been such a problem and it's been repealed.
I think that there are lots of folks in those states that would, argue that there's not momentum to change them. But what I can talk about is the state of Ohio and what folks here want, and it's not anyone being able to carry a gun nearly anywhere with no training.
Jennifer Thorne, Gerard Valentino, thank you very much for a civil discussion about gun laws in Ohio. Thanks. Yeah. And that's it for this week. For my colleagues at Ohio Public Radio and Television, thanks for watching. If you'd like to ask questions, make comments, or watch this week's show or earlier episodes, please visit our website at statenews.org. You can also watch on the Ohio Channel's website or at ideastream.org/Ohio. And you can follow Andy Chow, Joe Ingles, and me on Twitter. And please join us again next time for The State of Ohio.
Support for the statewide broadcast of the State of Ohio comes from the law firm of Porter, Wright, Morris & Arthur, LLP, helping businesses and individuals solve complex legal problems throughout Ohio, across the country, and around the world. On the web at porterwright.com. And from the Ohio Education Association, representing 120,000 members who work to inspire their students to think creatively and experience the joy of learning. Online at ohea.org.